I didn't come to this small, forgotten town looking for a tidal wave. I came for the silence, for the neat, ordered quiet of the county archive, where the only voices were the rustle of brittle paper and the ghosts of long-dead pioneers whispering their secrets through faded ink. My life was a catalog collection of small, manageable things. My cottage at the end of a long dirt road, my towering stacks of books, the precise ritual of my morning tea. It was a fortress built of solitude, and I was its contented king. Then there was Cole. He was not a small, manageable thing. He was the opposite, a force of nature clad in denim and dust, a man who seemed to occupy more space than his physical form required. Cole was a rancher, a mechanic, a living piece of the rugged landscape I only ever read about. He was all sharp angles and solid mass, a profile cut from granite against the endless sky. For 2 years, he existed only at a distance, a fixed point in my peripheral vision. His battered blue truck parked outside the feed store, the solid set of his shoulders as he loaded hay bales, muscles moving with an easy, practiced power that felt like a different language. The low rumble of his voice in the general store, a sound that always seemed to snag on the edges of my hearing, pulling my attention against my will. I manufactured a whole narrative for him, a story built from these distant observations. He was arrogant, I decided. That confident stride, the way he never seemed to rush, the slight, almost imperceptible smirk he wore when talking to others. It all screamed of a man utterly at ease in his own skin, a comfort I had never known. He was the king of this dusty kingdom, and I was the strange, pale creature who scurried between the library and his hermit's cottage. Our worlds were not meant to intersect. I dealt in paper and ink. He dealt in soil and steel. Sometimes our paths would cross. I'd be leaving the grocery store, my canvas bags full of vegetables and rice, and he'd be walking in, smelling of gasoline and clean sweat. He would nod, a short, sharp dip of his chin. I would feel my own neck stiffen, managing a jerky, inadequate nod in return before looking firmly at the ground, my heart performing a frantic, ridiculous tap dance against my ribs. I told myself it was intimidation. He was physically imposing a wall of a man, and that gaze of his, a startling, clear blue that seemed to see right through my carefully constructed defenses. When his eyes met mine, for that brief, terrifying second, I felt exposed, stripped down to all my anxieties and my bookish softness. I felt judged, found wanting, so I cultivated the distance. It was a necessary buffer, a safety zone. He was a piece of the local scenery, like the water tower or the old oak tree in the town square. Something to be observed, noted, and kept at arm's length. My quiet life depended on it. My fortress of solitude had no room for a force of nature. It had no defense against the tidal wave. The sky had been a bruised, unsettling purple all day. A warning. The air was thick and heavy, clinging to my skin like a wet shroud. The weather radio had been crackling about flash floods for hours, a frantic, tinny voice of doom that I, in my usual arrogance, had mostly ignored. My cottage had stood for 100 years. It could handle a little rain. But this wasn't a little rain. This was the sky opening up and trying to drown the world. It started as I was driving home from the archive. The first fat drops splattering against my windshield like thrown gravel. Within minutes, it was a solid sheet of gray, a deafening roar that swallowed the sound of my small car's engine. The wipers fought a losing battle, smearing the water back and forth, offering only strobing, nightmarish glimpses of the road ahead. The road to my cottage was low-lying, tracing the path of a creek that was usually little more than a trickle. Tonight, it was a monster. Brown, churning water was already spilling over the asphalt, carrying leaves and branches in its greedy current. I should have turned back. Any sane person would have turned back. But my cottage was my shell, my safe place. The thought of spending a night in a sterile motel room in town, surrounded by the noise of strangers, was somehow more terrifying than the storm. So I pushed on, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my breath held tight in my chest. The engine sputtered first. A cough, a hiccup. Then, with a final pathetic gasp, it died. The car drifted to a stop, the sudden silence inside the cabin more horrifying than the roar of the rain outside. Water was already halfway up the tires. A dark, swirling soup. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my denial. I was trapped. A tiny, metal box in the middle of a rising river. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic trapped bird trying to beat its way out. This is it. This is how it ends. Drowned in a ditch because I was too stubborn and antisocial to stay in town. The irony was not lost on me, even as my throat closed with fear. I tried the key again, and again. Nothing but a dead, hopeless click. The water was higher now, lapping at the bottom of the doors. I could feel the car begin to shift, a subtle, sickening lurch as the current pushed against it. Then, through the smeared curtain of rain, I saw them. Headlights. Two bright, unwavering circles of light, high off the ground, cutting through the deluge. They were coming from behind me, moving slowly but steadily. A truck. A very big truck. It pulled up alongside my car, its massive engine a low, reassuring rumble that I could feel in my bones. The driver's side window rolled down, and a face leaned out into the rain. It was him, Cole. Of course it was him, because the universe apparently had a deep and abiding passion for situational humor at my expense. He looked at my car, submerged and pathetic. He looked at me, my face no doubt a mask of wide-eyed terror. For a moment, I saw nothing in his expression, just a blank assessment of the situation. Then he shouted over the storm. "You're not going anywhere in that." It wasn't a question. It was a fact, a stark, undeniable declaration. I could only stare, rain and fear and a profound, bone-deep foolishness rendering me mute. "Road's washed out ahead," he yelled. "And behind us now. You need to get out of there before it gets swept away." He didn't wait for an answer. He opened his door, and without a moment's hesitation, swung himself out of the cab and into the thigh-deep water. The current was strong, pushing against him, but he moved through it with a stubborn, rooted strength, as if he were just wading through a puddle. He was at my passenger door in a few powerful strides. He wrenched it open against the pressure of the water. The storm surged into my small, safe space, a blast of wind and noise and cold. "Come on," he said, his voice closer now, a firm command. "Leave your stuff. Just get out." I fumbled with my seatbelt, my fingers clumsy and useless. He reached in, his large, calloused hand brushing against mine as he unclipped it for me. The touch was accidental, impersonal, but it sent a jolt through me, a spark of heat that had nothing to do with the cold rain. He took my arm, his grip strong and sure, and pulled me out of the car and into the chaos. The water was shockingly cold, a vicious, biting torrent that immediately soaked my jeans and tried to steal my footing. I stumbled, and his arm went around my waist, holding me steady against his side. I was pressed against him, my face buried in the rough, wet fabric of his jacket. He smelled of rain and earth and something else, something uniquely him. "Got you," he grunted, and then we were moving, fighting our way through the churning water toward the sanctuary of his truck. He was a shield, a breakwater, taking the brunt of the current as he half-carried, half-dragged me to safety. He hoisted me up into the passenger seat as if I weighed nothing, then circled around and climbed back behind the wheel, water streaming from him, pooling on the floor mats. He slammed the door shut, and the world went quiet again. Not silent, but muffled. The roar of the storm was outside now, a beast trying to get in. Inside the cab of the truck, there was only the sound of the engine's low thrum, the rhythmic slap of his own powerful wipers, and our breathing. Mine, ragged and shallow. His deep and steady. He put the truck in gear and, with a power that felt unstoppable, turned us around and started back the way we'd come. Away from my cottage, away from my life, and into his. The road back to his ranch was a treacherous landscape of water and debris. He navigated it with a calm, focused intensity, his hands steady on the wheel. I sat beside him, shivering, wrapped in a silence that felt as heavy as a wet blanket. My car was gone, swallowed by the storm. My carefully ordered world had been washed away. I was adrift, and he was the only solid land in sight. His ranch house was set back from a main road, a dark shape against the darker sky. A single light burned in a window, a lonely beacon. He parked the truck near a large barn and killed the engine. The silence that fell was absolute, broken only by the drumming of rain on the metal roof. "Well," he said, his voice rough, "looks like you're staying here tonight." It wasn't a question. It was another fact. My mind, still numb with shock, could only accept it. I had no car, no home to go to, no choice. Inside, the house was warm and smelled of wood smoke and coffee. It was surprisingly neat, organized. A large, well-worn leather sofa faced a stone fireplace where embers still glowed faintly. A massive golden retriever lifted its head from a rug, thumped its tail twice, and then settled back down with a sigh. "You're soaked," Cole stated, his gaze sweeping over my dripping form. "There are clothes in the guest room. I'll get you some." He disappeared down a hallway without waiting for a reply, his wet boots leaving dark prints on the wooden floor. I stood there, dripping onto his clean rug, feeling like a stray animal brought in from the storm. This was his space, his sanctuary. Every object held the imprint of his life. A row of worn paperbacks on a shelf, a framed photo of an older couple on the mantelpiece, a set of heavy, iron-looking coasters on the coffee table. It was so much more intimate than seeing him from across a parking lot. It was an invasion. My presence here felt like a violation of some unspoken rule. He returned with a stack of folded clothes, a soft-looking flannel shirt and a pair of gray sweatpants. These should fit. Mostly. He handed them to me, and again, his fingers brushed against mine. This time I was ready for it, but the jolt was just as potent. A low, humming current that started in my fingertips and spread up my arm. My breath hitched. I snatched my hand back as if burned. Did he notice? I risked a glance at his face. His expression was unreadable, his blue eyes shadowed in the dim light. He just pointed. "Bathroom's the first door on the right. Towels are in the closet." The hot shower was a miracle, washing away the cold and some of the fear. I stood under the spray for a long time, letting the water sluice over me, try to process the sheer surreality of the situation. I was in Cole's house. I was about to wear his clothes. The man I had spent 2 years avoiding and mythologizing was now my reluctant host, my savior. The world had tilted on its axis. His clothes were, as predicted, too big. The sweatpants bunched around my ankles, and the flannel shirt hung on me like a tent. But they were warm and soft and smelled faintly of him. That same scent of clean earth and laundry soap. I buried my face in the collar for a moment, inhaling. It was a strangely comforting, deeply unsettling sensation. I felt like an imposter, a pretender wearing a costume of intimacy. When I emerged, he was stoking the fire, bringing the embers back to vibrant life. He had changed, too, into a dry t-shirt and jeans. The t-shirt was dark gray and stretched across the broad expanse of his shoulders and chest. I tried very hard not to stare at the way the firelight played over the muscles in his arms as he worked. He looked up as I approached, his eyes lingering on me for a fraction of a second. "Better. Yes. Thank you." The words felt small and inadequate. "Thank you for everything." For stopping, he gave a short nod, turning his attention back to the fire. "Couldn't just leave you there." He stood up, dusting his hands on his jeans. "Hungry? I can make something." My stomach was a tight knot of anxiety, but I hadn't eaten since lunch. "I don't want to be any trouble." A corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. It was a fleeting, unfamiliar sight. "Bit late for that," he said, but his tone was dry, not unkind. He headed toward the kitchen. "Grilled cheese is about all I've got the energy for." I followed him, hovering awkwardly in the doorway of the kitchen. It was a simple, functional space. Clean counters, heavy-duty appliances. But on a small built-in shelf near the window, something caught my eye. A neat row of books. Not the paperbacks I'd seen in the living room, but serious-looking hardcovers. History, agricultural science, and, tucked at the end, a volume of poetry by Mary Oliver. It was such a small, unexpected detail. It didn't fit the narrative I'd written for him. The arrogant rancher, the man of soil and steel. Poets didn't belong in that story. He worked with an efficient economy of motion, getting out bread, butter, cheese. His hands, which I'd only ever seen gripping tools or steering wheels, were surprisingly deft. They were large, calloused hands, with a lattice of faint, pale scars across the knuckles. Hands that had worked hard their entire life. But they were gentle as he sliced the cheese. He caught me staring. "What?" he asked, his voice low. I felt a flush creep up my neck. "Nothing. Just, you have a Mary Oliver book." The words came out before I could stop them. He paused, a knife in his hand. He glanced at the shelf, then back at me. A flicker of something, surprise, defensiveness, crossed his face. "Yeah, so, I just didn't expect it." I immediately regretted saying it. It sounded judgmental, condescending, just like he probably always thought I was. "I mean, I like her work. A lot," I finished lamely. He didn't reply, just went back to making the sandwiches, the set of his shoulders a little stiffer than before. The silence stretched, thick with my own awkwardness. I had done it. I had confirmed his worst assumptions about me. The snooty bookworm from the city who looked down on him. "Look," I started, needing to fix it. "I'm sorry. That came out wrong." He placed the sandwiches in a hot pan, and they began to sizzle. He still didn't look at me. "Forget it, no." I took a breath. "For 2 years, I've seen you around town, and I made up a story about you in my head, and it was wrong. I'm sorry, that got his attention." He finally turned, leaning back against the counter and crossing his arms over his chest. The pose was defensive, but his eyes were curious. "A story? What kind of story?" My stomach plummeted. Now I really had to say it. "I thought you were arrogant," I mumbled, staring at the floor. "I thought you looked at me like I was some kind of bug. Something fragile and weird that didn't belong here." The silence that followed was long and heavy. I braced myself for anger, for mockery, for him to tell me to get out of his house, storm or no storm. Instead, I heard a low sound, a huff of air. I looked up. Cole was shaking his head, a wry, tired smile on his face. It transformed him, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "A bug," he repeated, his voice full of disbelief. "God, is that what you thought?" He ran a hand through his damp hair. "I thought the exact same thing about you." I blinked. "What?" "Not the bug part," he clarified. "The other part. I thought you were the one who thought you were too good for this place. You're always so quiet. Head down." You looked at me like I was just some dumb hick, covered in grease and dirt. The world tilted again, even more violently this time. All this time, 2 years of careful avoidance, of imagined animosity. It was all a misunderstanding, a mirror image of my own insecurity reflected back at me. We were just two idiots, telling ourselves the same stupid story from opposite sides of the street. A laugh escaped me, a short, sharp, incredulous bark of a laugh. "Wow," I said, shaking my head. "We are both morons." He grinned, a real grin this time. It lit up his entire face. "Yeah," he said. "Looks like it." He turned and flipped the sandwiches. "Come on, moron. Let's eat." We ate on the sofa, in front of the crackling fire. The grilled cheese was perfect, salty, buttery, and hot. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. The storm still raged outside, a wild animal clawing at the windows, but in here, in the circle of firelight, a fragile truce had been declared. He asked me about my work at the archive, and for the first time, I talked about it with someone who seemed genuinely interested. I told him about deciphering a 100-year-old diary, about the thrill of touching a piece of history. He listened, his head tilted, his blue eyes fixed on my face. In turn, I asked him about the ranch. He spoke of calving seasons and broken fences, of the constant, unending battle against weather and finances. There was no arrogance in his voice now, only a deep, weary love for the land and the life he'd been born into. I saw the weight he carried, the exhaustion behind the facade of quiet confidence. At one point, he gestured toward a stack of papers on a side table, a mess of official-looking forms and dense paragraphs. "That's my latest headache," he said with a sigh. "Grant application for new irrigation equipment. It's like they write it in a different language on purpose." I leaned over to look. It was a federal grant, dense with bureaucratic jargon and convoluted requirements. But it was a language I understood. It was my native tongue. "I can help with this," I said, the word surprising me as much as him. He looked at me, then at the papers, then back at me. You can. It's what I do, I explained. I organize information. I navigate bureaucracy. This is just a different kind of archive. I picked up the top page. You're filling out the wrong supplemental form, for starters. And you need to cross-reference your projected water usage in Section C with the environmental impact statement in Appendix B. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The powerful, capable man who had pulled me from a flood was lost in a sea of paperwork. And I, the fragile bookworm, was the one with the lifeboat. The power dynamic, which had been so skewed just hours before, had suddenly, completely leveled. I would appreciate that, he said, his voice quiet. A lot for a moment. I was just his rescuer, his equal. The thought sent a warm, unfamiliar pride through me. The storm showed no signs of letting up. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the house into a deeper darkness, lit only by the dancing flames in the fireplace. Well, Cole said into the sudden dark. Guess that's that. The loss of electricity felt significant. It severed the last tie to the outside world. We were truly isolated now, just two people in a small wooden house, surrounded by the howling wind and rain. The intimacy of the space intensified, becoming a tangible presence in the room. Cole got up and came back with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Might as well, he said, his voice a low rumble in the near dark. He poured a generous amount into each glass and handed one to me. Our fingers brushed again as I took it. This time, neither of us pulled away. The contact lingered for a second too long, a silent acknowledgement. A question. I took a sip. The whiskey was strong and smooth, burning a warm path down my throat. We drank in silence for a while, watching the fire. The shadows it cast made the room seem both larger and smaller, a space of secrets and flickering light. I really was an idiot, I said quietly, breaking the silence. About you. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. I wasn't any better. Every time I saw you in town, you were just so self-contained. Like you were in your own world and didn't want anyone else in it. It was a fortress, I admitted, the whiskey loosening the truth from my tightly guarded chest. Easier to keep people out than to risk. You know, risk what? He asked, his voice soft. I looked at him. His face was half in shadow, half in golden light. The hard edges were gone, replaced by a vulnerability that mirrored my own. Risk them seeing you're not what they think you are. Or worse, that you are. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze lost in the flames. My father was like that, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Our man believed feelings were a weakness. If you couldn't fix it with your hands, it wasn't a real problem. He took a long drink of whiskey. He would have hated that I read poetry. The confession hung in the air between us, a fragile, precious thing. He had just handed me a piece of his soul, a key to the man behind the wall of muscle and quiet confidence. He was lonely. I could feel it, a deep, resonant ache that matched the one in my own chest. My parents were professors. I offered in return, laying down a piece of my own. They loved ideas more than people. I was their most interesting and most disappointing project. Too emotional, too sensitive, too much. We were two sides of the same coin. One taught to hide his heart, the other taught his heart was a flaw. And we had both ended up profoundly alone. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't awkward or heavy. It was a shared space, filled with everything we had just admitted. The air was thick with it, charged and electric. I could feel the pull between us, a magnetic force growing stronger with every shared glance, every beat of the storm outside. He turned to look at me, his body angled toward mine on the sofa. The space between us felt impossibly small. Leo, he said, and the sound of my name in his voice was a revelation. He'd never said it before. It sounded new. It sounded right. I couldn't speak. I could only look back at him, my heart a slow, heavy drum in my chest. This is happening. This is real. He set his glass down on the floor with a soft clink. He didn't take his eyes off me. He was asking permission. His gaze dropped to my mouth, then back to my eyes. A silent, terrifying, exhilarating question. I gave him the only answer I could. I leaned forward just an inch. A signal. An invitation. He moved slowly, closing the last few inches between us. It was agonizingly, exquisitely slow. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the whiskey on his breath. His hand came up, not to grab me, but to gently cut my jaw, his thumb stroking softly against my skin. The calloused roughness was a shock, a thrill. "Is this okay?" he whispered, his voice thick. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. And then he kissed me. It was nothing like I had ever imagined. It wasn't frantic or demanding. It was a question, a discovery. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, testing. He was learning the shape of my mouth, and I was learning his. It was a kiss of profound, staggering honesty. It tasted of whiskey and rain and 2 years of unspoken longing. I made a small sound in the back of my throat, and the kiss deepened. My hand came up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. It was racing as fast as mine. He wasn't just a force of nature. He was a man, as nervous and hopeful and breakable as I was. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. We were both breathing heavily, the air mingling between us. "Leo," he breathed out again, like a prayer. I finally found my voice. "Cole," I whispered back. And then I closed the distance and kissed him again, no longer hesitant, but with all the pent-up fear and loneliness and hope of the last 2 years pouring out of me. He met me with equal force, his arms sliding around my back, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us at all, just the heat and the dark and the sound of the storm raging outside our newfound sanctuary. I woke to the unfamiliar gray light of dawn filtering through a strange window. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind a foggy landscape. Then it all came rushing back. The storm, the flood, Cole. My heart did a painful lurch. I was on the sofa, tangled in a heavy wool blanket. The fire had died down to pale, sleeping embers. The house was utterly silent. He was gone. A cold dread, colder than the floodwater, seeped in my bones. I sat up, the blanket pooling around my waist. The flannel shirt I was wearing felt alien, a costume from a play that was now over. The empty whiskey glasses still sat on the floor, evidence of a night that now felt like a dream. Or a mistake. My mind, my old, treacherous enemy, immediately began its work. He regrets it. Of course, he regrets it. He woke up this morning, saw me sleeping on his couch, and was filled with a horrified clarity. A moment of whiskey-fueled, storm-induced madness. That's all it was. I swung my legs off the couch, my feet hitting the cold wooden floor. The silence of the house was an accusation. He had fled. He couldn't even face me. He was probably out in the barn, pitching hay with a furious energy, trying to sweat out the memory of his mistake. The memory of me. The self-loathing was a physical sickness, a sour taste in the back of my throat. I was a fool, a naive, lonely fool who had mistaken a moment of shared vulnerability for something more. I had read the signs all wrong, projecting my own desperate longing onto him. The arrogant rancher, the sensitive poet, the lonely man, they were all just characters in another story I'd made up. The reality was the empty room, the silence. I had to get out. I couldn't be here when he came back, couldn't face the awkward, pitying look in his eyes. I stood up, my limbs stiff and clumsy. My own clothes, which I had left in a damp pile in the bathroom, were still there, cold and clammy. I changed back into them, the wet denim clinging unpleasantly to my skin. It felt like a punishment, a penance for my stupidity. I folded his flannel shirt and sweatpants neatly, placing them on the arm of the sofa. A pathetic, tidy little apology. I looked around the quiet room, a place that had felt like a sanctuary just hours before. Now it felt like a trap. Every object mocked me. The bookshelf, the fireplace, the empty space beside me on the couch. The rain had stopped. Through the window, I could see a world washed clean, glistening under a watery sun. The road would probably be passable, at least passable enough to walk. My cottage was only a few miles away. I scribbled a note on the back of a stray receipt from my pocket. "Thank you for everything. The roads look clear enough to walk." Now, it was cowardly and insufficient, but it was all I could manage. I left it on the kitchen counter, next to the sink where we had stood so close. I let myself out the front door, closing it softly behind me, the click of the latch sounding like a final judgment. The air was cool and clean, smelling of wet earth and pine. I started walking, my soaked sneakers squelching with every step. I didn't look back. The walk was a blur of misery. My car was still where I'd left it, nose down in a muddy ditch, a monument to my folly. I walked past it without stopping. When I finally reached my cottage, it felt alien. My fortress of solitude. It had always been my refuge, the one place I felt completely safe. But as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the silence that greeted me was different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. It was the sound of absence. The whole place was haunted by him. I saw the books on my shelves and thought of his Mary Oliver. I looked at my own small, neat kitchen and thought of him making grilled cheese. I sat on my own sofa and felt the ghost of his arm around me, the phantom warmth of his body pressed against mine. My solitude, once a comfort, was now a cage. He had broken into my fortress, not with force, but with a quiet, unexpected kindness. And when he left, he had taken the cornerstone with him, leaving the whole structure unstable, ready to collapse. A day passed, then another. The phone remained silent. My email inbox was empty. Every time a car drove down the main road, my heart would leap into my throat, a frantic, hopeful spasm, only to sink back down when it passed without turning. I tried to lose myself in work, driving my spare car, a sputtering old relic, into the archive. But the faded ink and brittle paper offered no comfort. The ghosts in the records were quiet, their stories no match for the roaring silence in my own head. I was living in the aftermath, the quiet devastation after the tidal wave had receded, leaving all my carefully ordered life in ruins. I replayed the night over and over, a masochistic loop of memory. The kiss, the confessions, his voice saying my name. Had I imagined the feeling behind it? The raw vulnerability in his eyes? Or was I just that easy to fool? By the third day, a grim, bitter resignation had begun to set in. It was over before it had even begun. It had been a fluke, a storm-bound anomaly. We would go back to how we were before. Two strangers nodding awkwardly at each other in the grocery store, a universe of misunderstanding between us. But it would be worse now, because now I knew what I was missing. I had tasted connection, and the return to my old life felt like starvation. I was sitting on my porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple when I heard it. The low, familiar rumble of a big engine. My heart did its now familiar gymnastics, but this time the sound didn't fade. It grew louder. I looked up and my breath caught. It was his blue truck. It was turning onto my road. It drove slowly, cautiously, as if unsure of its welcome, and parked behind my own sad-looking car. The engine cut out, and for a long moment, nothing happened. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then the driver's side door opened, and Cole got out. He didn't stride confidently toward me. He hesitated, his hand resting on the open door. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped. He wasn't the arrogant rancher or the quiet hero. He was just a man, looking nervous and uncertain. He was holding something in his other hand. My flannel shirt. He finally closed the truck door and started walking toward me. Each step seemed to take a monumental effort. He stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, looking up at me. His clear blue eyes were filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Regret, fear, hope. It was all there, a turbulent, unreadable sea. "You left this," he said, his voice rough. He held up the shirt. "I didn't want to presume," I said, my own voice thin and reedy. "You ran," he stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was a heartbroken fact. "You were gone." I countered, a flare of defensiveness rising to protect my wounded pride. "I woke up and you were gone. What was I supposed to think?" He flinched, as if I'd struck him. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness. The generator for the well pump was fried. I had to fix it before the cattle ran out of water. I thought you'd still be there when I got back." He looked down at the ground, then back up at me, and his carefully constructed walls came crumbling down. God, Leo, I came back in and you were gone. You know, I thought you regretted it. I thought I'd pushed too far, that I'd scared you off. The world, which had been tilted for 3 days, suddenly slammed back into place. It wasn't just me. He had been living in his own version of hell, too. The same silence I had been screaming into, he had been listening to, thinking it was my choice. We were two morons. Still, you thought I regretted it? I whispered, standing up. What else was I supposed to think? He asked, his voice cracking. That's never happened to me before. With anyone, let alone a guy. He said the last part so quietly I almost didn't hear it. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I still don't. All I knew is that when I kissed you, it felt right. It felt more right than anything has in a long time. And then you were gone, and I thought I'd broken it. I thought I'd broken you. I walked down the steps until I was standing right in front of him, close enough to see the genuine fear in his eyes, close enough to smell the familiar scent of earth and gasoline. You didn't break anything, I said softly. I ran because I thought I was the mistake. I thought you woke up and regretted touching the fragile bookworm. A humorless laugh escaped him. Fragile? Leo, you're the strongest person I know. You live out here all by yourself. You've built this whole life from nothing. I'm the one who's a coward. I've spent 3 days trying to get up the nerve to drive over here. The honesty between us was a raw, terrifying, beautiful thing. All the stories we'd told ourselves were gone, burned away by the truth. All that was left was us. Two men, scared and confused and profoundly drawn to each other. So, I said, my voice shaking slightly. What do we do now? He looked at me, a long, searching look. I don't know, he admitted. This is all new territory for me. It's scary as hell. He took a step closer. But the thought of going back to how things were before, to just nodding at you in the grocery store, that's a hell of a lot scarier. My heart swelled. A painful, hopeful expansion in my chest. Me too, I whispered. He reached out, not with a confident grab, but with a hesitant, questioning hand, and laid it on my arm. His touch was electric, a confirmation. This was real. I want to try, he said. If you do, I covered his hand with my own, lacing our fingers together. His callous skin, his solid strength. It felt like an anchor. I do, I said. A slow smile spread across his face, a sunrise after a long, dark night. He looked relieved. He looked happy. He reached into his pocket with his free hand and pulled something out. A single, shiny key on a simple metal ring. He pressed it into my palm. What's this? I asked, looking down at the cold metal. It's a key to my house, he said, his gaze steady and serious. In case the road floods again. Or, in case it doesn't, it wasn't just a key. It was a promise, an invitation, a tangible symbol that the sanctuary was no longer just his. It could be ours. It was the most romantic, most terrifying, most wonderful gesture anyone had ever made for me. Tears pricked my eyes. Tears of relief, of joy. I closed my hand around the key, the sharp edges digging into my skin, grounding me. Cole, I started, but my voice broke. He just squeezed my hand. It's okay, he said softly. We can be morons together. And standing there, on the porch of my once lonely cottage, with his hand in mine and his key in my pocket, I knew my fortress of solitude had fallen. And I had never felt so safe. 6 months later, the morning light is different. It still filters in through a window, but it's a wide, generous window that looks out over rolling fields, not a narrow one facing a tangle of trees. The air smells not of damp earth and old paper, but of coffee and clean sheets and the faint, lingering scent of Cole sleeping beside me. I wake up slowly these days. There is no jolt of anxiety, no familiar dread of the silence. The silence now is a comfortable, shared thing. It's the quiet breathing of the man next to me, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft padding of a golden retriever's feet on the wooden floor. I turn my head on the pillow. Cole is still asleep, his face relaxed and peaceful in the early light. The hard lines of his jaw are softened, his mouth slightly parted. One of his strong, scarred hands is resting on my hip, a casual, proprietary weight that feels like home. I watch the steady rise and fall of his chest. and a feeling of profound, staggering peace settles over me. The morning after is no longer a crucible of anxiety. It's my favorite time of day. Sometimes I wake up and he's already gone, but the dread is gone too, replaced by the certainty that he'll be back. I'll find him in the barn, his brow furrowed in concentration as he fixes a piece of machinery, and he'll look up and give me that slow, private smile that is reserved only for me. Other mornings like this one, we wake up together, tangled in limbs and blankets, and the day begins not with a plan or a routine, but with a slow, sleepy kiss. His house is our house now. My books have colonized his shelves, mingling with his histories and poetry. The grant application, the one I helped him with, sits framed on his office wall. A ridiculous, sentimental trophy of the night our worlds collided. It was approved, and the new irrigation system hums in the fields, a testament to our unlikely partnership. My cottage is still there, but I rarely go. It feels like a relic from another life, a museum of a person I no longer am. I was a man who built walls to keep the world out. Now, my world has expanded to include fences that need mending, a dog that needs walking, and a man who needs me to find the right word when he can't. Cole stirs, his eyes fluttering open. They find mine immediately, a clear, startling blue in the morning sun. He doesn't say anything. He just smiles, that same soft, sleepy smile. He tightens his arm around me, pulling me closer until my head is tucked under his chin. I can feel the rumble in his chest as he speaks. "Morning," he murmurs into my hair. "Morning," I whisper back into the warm skin of his neck. It's so simple, so easy. The push and pull is gone, replaced by a steady, gentle rhythm. The rhythm of making coffee together, of sharing meals at the heavy wooden table, of falling asleep in the same bed every night without fear. We still have our moments of uncertainty, two men from different worlds, learning a new language together, but the fear is gone. We talk. We admit when we're scared. We hold on tighter. I think back to the man I was, the quiet archivist hiding in his fortress of solitude. I thought I wanted silence and order. I thought I had everything I needed. I was so sure of the story of my life, a small, carefully curated volume bound in loneliness. Cole was the plot twist I never saw coming. He wasn't a disruption. He was a revelation. The storm that I thought would drown me was the very thing that delivered me to shore. He didn't just pull me from a flooded road that night. He pulled me from a life half-lived, a life spent observing from a safe distance. He pulled me out of the quiet, dusty archive of my own heart and into the loud, messy, beautiful, living world. He showed me that home isn't a place with four walls. It's the steady, solid presence of the person sleeping next to you. It's a key in your pocket. It's the anchor you find in the middle of a storm.